I remember this one time, just about last year, when I was hiking the Inca Trail for about 8 hours. My name is Gary Ramos, and there's something that I would like to ask you. Isn't it boring to sometimes stay in the same city without ever knowing the other parts of the world? Now, I understand that some of you may not be able to travel because, obviously, you probably don't even have the money to do it. But that's okay. Or if you're just afraid. Either way, that's okay. All I want to do is express my opinion on why traveling is good. So for this speech, I'm going to be going over me traveling to not only Peru, but also my experiences with traveling to Brazil and the Appalachian Mountains region. So arriving in Fortaleza, that was in December 2023. That was right after I celebrated Christmas. That was, I'd say, in the afternoon of Christmas Day. I traveled late at night. Basically, it was like a red eye flight. It was an overnight flight, so I didn't arrive in Fortaleza, Brazil, until the next morning, around after 7, shortly after 7, if I can remember correctly. The purpose of the travel, well, my mom was so desperate to meet my dying grandmother. That's why she didn't celebrate Christmas with me. She left a week before I did. She was so desperate. I understood. My grandmother dying of Alzheimer's. When Fortaleza I stayed in downtown. I stayed in this apartment, in this mixed use hotel called Landscape. Then after that, what I would like to tell you about my activities, what I did in Fortaleza, all I did was just talk to my family, as well as visit this one sound museum where I listen to old audio recordings of Brazilian music. Very surreal, if you ask me. And by the way, yes, I was celebrating New Year's 2024 there. I was outside in the beach with a crowd of like a few thousand people celebrating New Year's next to me. After that, the remaining parts of my vacation, I stayed in this popular resort town called Jericoacoara. Basically, Jericoacoara is known for its sand duning. Is known for its sand duning. That's why I went there to to be duning in the sand, as well as this one's this one activity called skibunda, where it's like sledding, except you're sledding in the sand. You're going down a sand hill using a using a using a surfboard to go down, and then at the bottom, sometimes there can be water, sometimes there isn't water. And also, I visited a popular historical rock formation called Pedra Furada. Along the way, I would visit places. I visited places such as the Lazy Tree, not because the tree is lazy, but because of the wind blowing so much on the tree that it's almost horizontal, as well as a few water parks. So, in retrospect, yes, I indeed enjoy traveling in Brazil. However, I'm not finished just yet. 5.5 months later, I'm back in South America, this time where I traveled to Peru. Now, when it comes to Peru, at first, I was gonna originally travel 7 days earlier, but my parents were so desperate to travel to Peru that they just forgot about my passport, even though they were supposed to know that Passports are valid up until 6 months before they expire. And I told them several times, and yet they didn't pay attention. So we had to go to New Orleans because Miami would take several weeks just to renew your passport. And my parents didn't want to miss the opportunity, so we went to New Orleans just to have my passport renewed on the day I requested it. The only thing I visited in New Orleans passing the time was the French Quarter, as well as an insect museum. Coming to Lima, where I visited was my dad's childhood home, as well as the Cathedral of Lima, as well as this one pre-Columbian museum, pre-Columbian and pre-Incan museum, before the Quechuans. Apart from that, it's just talking to my dad's best friends and their children, who are also my best friends from there too. Now in Cusco, all I did in Cusco was explore the ruins close to Cusco, as well as visit as well as me visiting a church that used that used to take in a church this church called Saksay Waman. Saksay Waman being an old Inca temple that the church is built around on. Now, the most important thing that I would like to talk about in this second main point, is the Inca Trail. Basically, I had to sleep at 8. I had to sleep very early at like 8 in the night and wake up 3 in the morning just so I can get the bus and then the train up until the 104th kilometer, which we arrived shortly before 9. And by 9 and for the next 8 hours we were hiking. All we did was hike the Inca Trail. Stopped in several places like Huayna, Intipunku, Sungate, and then finally Machu Picchu. But here's the problem. I had to limit I ate very little. I had to limit the amount of food the food intake, as well as water, because water was scarce. I couldn't have all the water for myself, and there is no natural places for water. There was, but there were fountains, but I didn't want to get sick. Besides, the worst part of the Inca Trail is that I only had a brownie and coffee for breakfast, and for lunch all I had was Peruvian potato chips, Peruvian chips, and water. That's it. As well as canchitas, a popular Peruvian snack. Then after I started taking pictures of the Machu Picchu ruins and mountain, that's when I started throwing up. And then the first time after I throwed up, I started sneezing over 20 times, just because an indigenous person brought a llama close to me, and that's why I started sneezing. Then after we got down, we went to a nearby town called Aguascalientes, which is the closest town to Machu Picchu. Then from there, I would throw up. I would have 3 more episodes of me throwing up. The second time after I threw up is when I got checked into my hotel room, and by that time is when I lost all my appetite. I couldn't eat anything. I couldn't drink. Not even I couldn't even drink water. I was only limited to drinking Gatorade, which even that I also threw up 2 more times. That same time I was experiencing diarrhea. And I have to say I was the one that experienced the worst in terms of altitude sickness. I had the worst. I had it the worst. While my dad had it the best, had it the least. Then the next day all I did was visit the ruins for about 2 hours, and then go back to Cusco, and then go back to Lima, and then go back home. It took me over 3 days just to regain my whole appetite after after that trail. Yes, I know it was a hectic ride in Peru, but apart from that, now I'd like to talk about me traveling to another region within the United States, that being the Appalachians. So I'm going to be finally talking about the different areas I visited within the Appalachian Mountains. So the first time I've been there was when I was visiting the Georgia North Carolina border, where I visited where I visited a where I was trailing where I was trailing in a place called High Shoals Falls, as well as me visiting the small town of Helen in Georgia. Around that place is where I traveled, is where I crossed into North Carolina, and to me and to cel- and I even celebrated New Year's twice there. On New Year's Day, after me celebrating New Year's 2023, that's when I went trailing for 3 hours in a trail called Jackrabbit Trailhead. The first time I've been to the mountains, I was in a small town called Hiawassee. There isn't much to do there except from visiting trails there, the nearby trails. The second time, I literally was in the middle of nowhere. We were renting out of a Verbo cottage, and that cottage was in the middle of nowhere. We were miles away from Hiawassee and Clayton, Georgia, which were the nearest towns close to where I was in New Year's 2023. The third time I've been to the Appalachian Mountains was when I was visiting a popular tourist towns known as Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, which are located in the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee. There's one trail that I visited that's around 1.5 miles called the John O&B Cabin. Nearby is where I also visited the Cataract Falls. That same day, that same afternoon is where I visited a popular attraction in Gatlinburg called Skybridge and Sky Trail. The next day in Pigeon Forge, I visited a I visited the Hollywood Wax Museum where it was basically showcases of celebrities made of wax. What I like the most about this trip is where I visited the largest house in the United States, that being the Biltmore State. It was basically what I've experienced in the Biltmore State was like this 90-minute guided tour where you had to hold this where it was basically an audio guided tour. You were holding a cell phone in your hand. You were given this cell phone and you had to put in your hand just so you can listen to what rooms to the explanation as to what is the significance of those rooms in the Biltmore State. Afterwards, I visited the gardens for an hour. I didn't have time to visit the villages because the next day I had to get back home. Along the way home, I stopped in Biltmore Gardens again, in the gardens of Biltmore again, and I visited the rest of the gardens that I didn't get to see on our initial day there. And those were my most favorite memories of all time in terms of traveling. I'm gonna be traveling again back in May, where I'm gonna be do where it's gonna be the renewal of vows. Over 25 years, my parents have been married and met together. So I would like to say that I hope this inspires you with getting you to start traveling to places that you always dreamed of going, but don't have the energy to do it. If you want to experience what I've experienced, go to Machu Picchu. Go go visit Jericoacoara. Go visit Gatlinburg. You're gonna love it. And if you have already traveled prior to the speech, where have you gone? I'm ecstatic to hear your stories, even if it's places that I haven't been before. And let me know if you have any other questions, if you like. I can talk about another story for my life. Now, once again, I hope this speech inspires you with getting you to start traveling. Thank you for listening. So, anyways, that's all I have to say here. So, therefore, finally, goodbye for now.